Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. It's Spanners here. Have you recovered from round one? Have we caught up on our sleep? Are we sitting comfortably? If so, then let's begin. The Chinese Grand Prix is on this weekend, and they are stubbornly refusing to run it at standard European race time. So if you want to catch the first sprint race of the year, you're up at 3 a.m. UK time. I'm thinking about it. It is better than FP3 after all, with qualifying a few hours later at 6 a.m. and then the race itself on Sunday is at 7 a.m. UK time, which feels like a luxury lie-in compared to last week, but it is the middle of the night for most Americans. Our review will be at 10:30 a.m. UK time with Chris Stevens and Christian Pedersen. Will a morning Christian Pedersen be more or less chaos? I suspect exactly the same. So today we'll be looking at some interesting factors ahead of the race. There's a new track surface, which will be fine as long as Pirelli knew about it in advance and they haven't just turned up to discover a resurfaced track with zero time to prep or study. Ooh, awkward. But even then, as long as the teams have got 3 full practice sessions, it's a sprint weekend, is it? So chaos ahead. And also, the news has just come in today, I think, from Auto, Motor und Sport, that F1 is abandoning, or maybe abandoning, the 2026 regulations for V10s. Also, it is a preview to the Chinese Grand Prix, so we'll be asking who has the most to prove, and we'll be addressing what you reckon about stuff. I like to give new talent a try. So we've got a young man from America joining us, Matt Trumpets. Hello, Matthew. How are you?
I am doing well, thanks. Looking forward to all sorts of technical shenanigans in the next few weeks.
Oh, yeah. This is like a Matt. This is in the Matt zone today.
Oh, yeah. Between Surface and Flexi tests, I'm just living my best life.
And we have the host of probably the 4th best F1 watch-along. It's Scott Stuffeyy. Hello, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me, Spanners. I'm banking as much sleep as I can this week in preparation for another early weekend. But I'm trying to be reserved because I understand our viewers from the other side of the world experience this at least 22 out of the 24 race weekends of a year. So it's not 2 race weekends in a row isn't all that bad, but yeah, trying to get as much sleep as I can in for another early one.
Well, speaking to my American friends on the Ringer, they tend to, I forget about Matt because Matt's so anglicized he doesn't count anymore. He's so conditioned to it. But the newer American fans, they see Formula One as this coffee sport on a Sunday. You wake up, you have it with your coffee, have it with some brunch. Whereas in the UK, it's like, no, it's a pub sport, it's a beer sport.
Yeah, middle of the afternoon, and not actually, I wouldn't mind F1 being a nice mid-morning thing, because then you've still got the rest of the day. You've still got the rest of Sunday to do what you want. With it being the middle of the afternoon, you've got that lead up to it, and then once it's done, it's kind of like, I've got to go to work tomorrow. So
yeah, it has changed over recent years. I'm sure growing up, Grand Prix used to be 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, whereas now they've moved towards more like 2, 3 o'clock in the UK, and I wonder if that is to make it a bit more comfortable for the US time zones. I don't know, but I've noticed a creep going over to the right-hand side. So some big news breaking is that the Flexi-wings aren't actually in China because they're still being transported. So there's some logistical delays. Pirelli have had some delays getting their tyres in. And also, I think Mercedes, McLaren, and one other team, Aston Martin, have not got their cars there. So they've already had special dispensation to break curfew. And then that will be straight into a frantic FP1, which will be the only practice session. And then they'll be in sprint qualifying. And then the sprint race Saturday morning. Then they release Parc Fermé, and that'll be the next chance they get to do anything. But it's really rushed, Matt. It just seems like there's such a recipe for chaos this weekend.
Well, yeah, it's always, whenever you're going to countries and you have to clear customs and you have so little time, you're always potentially asking for trouble. But throw in a rule change on top of it, and I'm honestly baffled as to if there are any teams who aren't already capable of making this new updated rear wing test. That's the one we're talking about. What are they going to do? Like, I'm just thinking about, okay, so we have to re-engineer this plane so it flexes less. That means you've got to engineer it, you've got to lay it up, you've got to cure it, and then you have to get it from where you've done all that work, which is England, to China. And they found out about this rule Monday morning. It just seems like to me, not a lot of thought went into the logistics when they decided to do this. It would have been much more sensible to make Japan the place to institute that and just not get so fussy about it. But that's just a me thing.
Okay, so what do you think is actually going to happen? We're not going to have an Indy 2005 situation where you've just got teams that can't race. We don't even know which teams they're talking about. Or, well,
no,
we
don't. Well, I mean, okay, so here we go. This has been all along. It's been alleged that McLaren have not complied with the spirit of the updated DRS slot gap regulations. And after asking the teams to install rear-facing camera housing, record the footage, give it to the FIA, and put little dots on it so that they can see visually what's going on, they have, without naming a team, updated the amount of flex allowable at the ends of the main plane, if I've understood that correctly. They apply a 750 Newton force or 75 kilonewton force on either end. And it used to be a 2 millimeter deflection. It's going to 0.75 millimeters for this round, and we'll go down to 0.5 for the following round. That's the technical bit. The interesting bit to me is we have seen this circus played before, and it's pretty much Red Bull that's been driving this media in the narrative because they're the ones who openly have complained about it. But last time we saw complaints about Flexi stuff, and they instituted a deal like this, everyone thought it would nerf Red Bull. It was a Flexi floors. Remember that back in Spain? But instead, it nerfed Aston Martin. So I'm actually kind of concerned here because I'm pretty sure this is going to have no effect at all on McLaren. But I'm wondering, is there a team somewhere that's going to be like, oh no, we are so in trouble? And it's not going to be the one you expect. In fact, it might well be like one of the backmarkers who lacks the resources to actually solve this problem in an incredibly short period of time. So yeah, I think the FIA's tight technical directives like this often miss the mark at who we think they're aimed at.
Isn't it? Oh, I'm not going to say it's a coincidence because actually
it
is a skill. It is a skill. Red Bull are the best at this. Whenever they find something that they have an issue with on another team's car, they go on this public drive to point out that this is an issue that they think they have with the car or other teams' cars. And because of all of their, what's the right word, their drive in the public sphere, and obviously with good relationships they probably have within the FIA, they get these things investigated and changed. And other teams haven't been able to do so. I mean, with respect, if this is a response because of how McLaren looked so dominant in the first, in arguably testing, where everyone was very impressed with their race runs and their long runs, and then their performance in when the track was drying in Australia, then where was this kind of call for investigations or looking into the Red Bull car over the last 3 years? Now, of course, there are theories about that, but I can guarantee you if that had happened and Red Bull were the team that was so far behind, well, they are now, arguably, they're straight on it. Race one, they've found something where they think another team has an advantage and they want it clamped down on. And it makes me think as well that, I know, Matt, you've said, and I agree with you, that I don't think this is the sole reason why McLaren are so good. It's more so something to do with what they're doing some wizardry with the tyres, and there are theories behind that in regards to how they're managing to look after those tyres a lot longer than everyone else at the moment, which funnily enough was a trait of the Red Bull for 3 years until a rumoured certain alleged device was removed from the car. But
Oh,
I think there's something that the FIA, for them to do it this week, I know we know they're a bit incompetent, but for them to do it instantly this week with all these logistical issues and everyone being based halfway around the other side of the world makes me think that there's a clear performance advantage that they think McLaren are getting, or some other teams are, from this.
need to clarify some things there that Scott said. Firstly, I'm sure there are some competent, great people at the FIA. I think Scott is commenting on sometimes the often chaotic perception we get from the outside. Also, the tyre heating thing, there's a few different elements here that we're talking about. So Red Bull, I think, had a brake duct where you could get heat into the tyres, right? And so there was some system where you get heat into the tyres but not overheat them. And they were using the heat from the brakes to be able to do that. And the rumor is they had, or what I've heard is they had an engineer who was in charge of that. That engineer is now at McLaren. So if they're making noises about that brake heating system heating up the tyres, which Horner is, it's probably because he knows exactly who was doing it and they were doing it on their car as well. That is different to what they were pulled up for last year. I don't think they were ever at any point pulled up for that specific system. They were pulled up for being able to adjust their bib, so at the front, being able to adjust that between qualifying in the race, which you're not allowed to do, but you can stick your hand in the front, looks like you're doing something else, and you can just, if it's hidden, if the adjustment point is hidden like that, no one would see them change it. All the other teams' adjustment points for that were on the outside, and then they made this big show that they showed on Sky TV of like, no, it'd be really complicated. You've got to use 3 extensions to do it, which is anyone who's done any spannering knows that was absolute rubbish. The other thing they got picked up on for was the asymmetric braking that blew up in Australia, subsequently was denied, went off a cliff. But George Russell has recently said, no, Red Bull being caught up was nothing to do with in-season development. It was because of unusual circumstances, and would not elaborate. So, Matt, I just wanted to clarify that, because that's not, the braking thing is not the issue currently going on at the moment. It is this Flexi-wing. And I think they got through testing. They must have shown their wings to the FIA. They've probably used the same concept of wing. So the FIA had all the time in the world to look at it. It was an issue last year, so it's not exactly a surprise. It ran in Bahrain, so it shouldn't be a surprise there. I saw some video footage, and it did look like it was flattening a bit and then popping back up. But it's passed all the tests. So if it's passed all the tests, I can understand them saying spirit of the rules. Okay, we're going to change the rules. You've got a few races to adapt. So Red Bull had a chance to change their asymmetric braking setup. They didn't drop off a cliff immediately after Melbourne when it was definitely obvious that that's what was happening and where they were probably busted. Why are McLaren suddenly not even getting any time at all? Because they wouldn't have had any time to make those changes. It's been on a boat. I think it would be really, really controversial if it ends up being McLaren's wing nerfed, or they have to run, I guess, a higher spec of wing or a different wing that doesn't flex as much at China speeds, and then Max wins because they were nerfed doing that after one race with no opportunity when they weren't actually outside of the tests. That would be absolute scenes, Matt. Absolute scenes.
Yeah, well, and this gets just back to the difficulty in general of dealing with aeroelasticity, the fact that everything distorts or bends or flexes at speed under load. There's a static test they impose, and that's supposed to be a proxy for it'll only bend so much. But the engineers are incredibly clever with how they lay things up, how they crisscross the different carbon weaves, the type of glues that they use. And they can really, and Red Bull has past mastered this. They can play all sorts of tricks, but I think history may also be an interesting guide here. And one reason why I think McLaren is least likely to be the team in trouble is they also got in trouble for their flexi front wing end plates. Remember, like around Monza, and the FIA gave them time, and they already they knew they were on or over the edge. And they were like, oh, yeah, fine. Oh, we actually have another wing here that won't be a problem at all. We'll just put that on for the rest of the season. And then it didn't really affect them at all. There's no way, if they're flirting, if they're looking at that footage themselves and going, let's get away with it as long as we can, there's no way they don't actually already have a solution on board. But there might be other teams that weren't flirting with it nearly as much that do get caught in this dragnet. And that's what I really worry about.
Yeah, you've just pointed it out there, Matt. It really wouldn't surprise me if McLaren already have a replacement wing for this. Like, they would have known that they were probably flirting with the rules, and it's like, let's see how long we can get away with this for before it's clamped down, which they knew was going to be in round 9 after Monaco. So it's or round 8, is it? Barcelona is when this new technical directive was coming in. So it's like, let's see if we can utilize this for 8 races. That could be the key, like it was for Max at the start of last year, where we dominate the start of the season, we get that head start, and then okay, the rest of the field starts to catch up maybe with us a little bit, but by then we've already won 7 out of the first 8 races, or 8 out of the 8 8 out of 8. Sorry, so I don't think McLaren would not have a replacement solution for this already. But yeah, expecting it to come literally and announced the day after of Australia is a bit bizarre, and I'm surprised they've not at least gone, Japan, because we've got that week's break logistically for everyone to then get stuff. Because let's say, what are we going to have happen? Are we then going to have teams, as you've mentioned, Spanners, are we going to have teams running completely different configurations on the rear wing to limit that flexing?
Yeah.
Or are we going to have teams disqualified at the end of the race? And are we all going to be sitting here waiting for the post-test and the analysis footage to see whether or not these teams are going to be retrospectively disqualified? Like, it's just going to ruin the whole race weekend in what is already shaping up to be potentially even more chaotic than what we just saw in Australia.
I wonder if they might have to run those cameras with some stickers on or something in FP1 to prove that it's, I don't know, if they'll have time to do that between that and
They'll look at that footage, but I suspect they'll test the wings in scrutineering before they go out on track. So we'll know before the race if there's a non-compliant wing. But Chris G in the chat brought up, I don't think they can run an old wing. And you would be correct. They can't run any rear wings from last season because the dimensions of the rear wing and the slot gap have changed. So this would have to be a newly engineered solution, which I suspect McLaren already has. And I don't think it's an issue for them. They have plenty of resources. But you worry about a team that might fall slightly afoul. They might be at 1 millimeter instead of 0.75, but they were well within the 2 millimeter, but they don't have the resource they didn't think it would be an issue, so they don't have a backup because they weren't flirting like McLaren was.
hacksaws and duct tape exist.
That's true.
And are
Helicopter
your
tape.
friend. So Maria asked a good question to get us to talking about the event itself. So Maria says, forgive my lack of knowledge. Don't ever be sorry for not knowing everything about a thing. Are there lots of long straights in China? Well, this will make a difference. Or can they just bring an old non-Flexi-wing to make sure they pass the new test? So the answer to that is, it has one ginormous straight, which is a mile long. I don't know. It was the longest straight before Baku, wasn't it? So if someone wants to look up how long that straight is, but it's mega long. It's like super duper long. And it's got a really long increasing radius corner up before it. There's loads of really punishing long corners as well. So you're going to have a lot of wear on the front left normally. And certainly the old track surface used to make this a really high wear circuit. So look, never be afraid to ask questions just because you think others around you might know. Some people will be sitting there going, which track is China? Which track is China again? Maria's asking that in our Patreon live chat. You can join them. It's an active Discord, not just during live stream recordings, but also during the races. A nice place to hang out. You can join us there by going to patreon.com/Missed Apex. So many people have joined since the beginning of the season. It's been a really happy thing for us that people have embraced the concept of supporting an independent creator. And because of you guys, I think we were 38th in the episode charts for our race review in the US sports category, all sports, 38th, and I think 58th in the UK charts. And in both charts, we were the 4th highest race review episode on Monday. So behind the likes of the BBC, P1 with Matt and Tommy, and The Race, they're the big 3 in the UK, and The Ringer, Matt and Tommy, and The Race in the US, but I'm also on The Ringer. But behind those guys, it was Missed Apex, because of the support we get from you. So thank you so much, not only to our patrons, but to everyone who says to anyone else, listen to Missed Apex podcast. They're fine. Yeah, they're fine. They're good background listening on a Monday morning. That's all we're really after. Thank you so much. Right, Matt, what do we... Firstly, was my assessment correct that it's normally a high wear circuit? And what do we think this time around?
Well, this is interesting. If we all think back last season, okay, let me rephrase. This was interesting to me. If we all think back to last season, remember this article came out, oh, they painted a new surface, blah, blah, blah. And it turns out this was done entirely without anybody's knowledge and at the last minute because there were some technical changes to circuit homologation. And the surface they used was, well, not the one that you would normally choose for a race track, like the one in Shanghai. So after the race, the FIA sort of told them, look, you're going to have to fix this. And they've done that. And from what I've heard, some people involved, everybody's very happy with the result. So the question then becomes, what kind of grip, what kind of wear are you going to have? And that's really down to what kind of aggregate they used and whether or not the edges are sharp or rounded and how closely compacted it is. And then also going to have to do with the type of sealant they use on top of the track. There's a pretty standard one. And if people are happy with it, they probably use the one that most, like Coda, remember when they resurfaced? There's a pretty standard one they use. So we're going to have to wait and see on the wear. But the issue also in China, as you point out, is going to be like the energy. Are there lots of high-speed turns? There's some really big braking zones. So you can still have issues with the tires that aren't just directly wear related. Probably lower wear than it was in the past because it's a new surface. But if the aggregate is really super sharp, it might actually be higher wear and higher grip.
But this is the thing that Pirelli have announced. They haven't specifically got prepared tires this weekend with the track surface, and that's the key factor here, is that we're going into a complete unknown at a circuit that is hard on certain points of the tire, particularly that front left as mentioned. What are we going to see here this weekend? Hopefully we don't see any blow-ups, but we could see either tires just go for the whole race distance.
I think that's the most likely.
Or we could see them completely fall off a cliff. So, I mean, I really don't know. It all depends on what Pirelli have prepared. I assume, obviously, it's based on last season. So, yeah, remember the last time? It's going to be this time around. China does have a habit of it raining. It did last season. But this year, it's going to be, as the weather report I'm looking at right now states, that it's going to be a clear race. So we are maybe going to see a repeat of what happened in Istanbul. That's the last kind of resurfaced track that I remember where things went.
That was unlucky though, because they did it so close to the start of the race, didn't they? That they had oils.
Yeah, it was something to do with the oils coming through and all that technical mumbo jumbo in regards to asphalt and stuff that kind of came through due to the conditions.
You're offending Matt. Do you know how often Matt messages me about asphalt related things? Like, it doesn't matter. I can just tell him to his face in person. I can say, Matt, I'm not interested in this asphalt chat.
That's what you ask Matt to do when you're struggling to fall asleep, don't you, Spanish?
Yeah, talk to me
within 30 seconds, you're gone.
Talk to me about asphalt, Matt. So, Matt, have they picked the hardest tyres? Because I think they would have come prepared for a high wear circuit. I think the most likely one of those scenarios Scott mentioned is that it's going to be lower wear than expected and be a bit of a one-stop, no tyre wear required.
I had that information in our last preview show, and I'm looking for it right now, what tires they're bringing, or what tires they brought last year. So I'll wait for the live chat.
Oh my God, that's the one thing you do.
Oh, all I know, I don't know the level of compounds, but it's the same level of compound that was last year. But of course, the actual construction of the tires always changes year on year. So it's same level of compound, but not the same exact construction of tire.
Here we go.
That we saw last year. But I'm sure Matt will be able to inform us, as you are the tire guru.
2, 3, and 4. That's what we're looking at. So one is the softest. 6. One is the hardest. 6 is the softest, and they've gone for 2, 3, 4. So this is the dead middle of the range. I believe the 3 was the hard tire in Australia, if that helps anybody out.
Nope, absolutely doesn't. Okay, so moving on from too much tire chat, there has been some actually really interesting breaking news from Automotor und Sport. You must say it in a German accent, and it's from tweeted out by Toby Gruner. And someone we find, I don't know if I'm alone, I find Toby relatively reliable for these kind of things.
Yeah, he's a good egg.
Yeah, it's definitely not rumor mongering. It's not Italian F1 press. No offense. I mean, there's no point in saying no offense. I clearly meant offense there. But there was a story that basically the 2026 regs are under serious threat. And that V10 chat that we thought was maybe some idle politicking, the V10s are now gaining momentum, Scott. A serious option for F1.
Bring back V10s. I'm all for it. I watched a video popped up on my TikTok earlier of Fernando Alonso driving round his Renault around Abu Dhabi for a demonstration, and just seeing Lewis Hamilton's eyes light up and say, oh, he loves that sound. Why did we ever get rid of it? And I totally agree. But it is very odd that this is gaining legs. As you said, I thought it was just Mohammed bin Sulayem just throwing stuff in the wind and trying to gain some brownie points, to be honest with you, with the fans because of what he's obviously been through. But yeah, it really does seem like that there's a few teams, unsurprisingly, that seem like, as the reports are, that are struggling with their engines for the development for 2026. We don't have a list of who those manufacturers are, unless you guys have been able to locate that. But I don't know what is going to happen here. Maybe it's FIA, as reported, kind of covering themselves in case these 2026 regs don't go too well. Like, if you look at the history of new regulations, they always get delayed a year. And it wasn't that long ago until the aero regs were all agreed upon, I think, by the teams. So I'm very surprised that this current set of regs isn't being extended. And this 2026, I mean, it's just, who knows?
Right. So this is the kind of delicious ridiculousness that I absolutely love to comment on, because so many people have made so many poor choices to get us to this very place. But let's go back a little bit. Let's remind ourselves that from the moment this regulation set was announced, there was one team that was always so incredibly negative about all of it. And it sounds like Med Mull, if I'm remembering correctly. And not surprisingly, I'm seeing them and Ferrari, interestingly, being tagged as the two teams that are actually like, yes, let's go to V10s and just skip this whole in-between hybrid nonsense. And if you surmise that's because they're not having a great time designing the new power unit, could one of them be the Renault of 2026? Well, then yes, you would probably be absolutely right about it. Because if you were in that situation, you would absolutely be pushing to kick the regs back, or just to skip them all together and do something simpler that you knew you could do better.
All right, question. Yeah. V10 engine, easier to make than a hybrid F1 engine?
Any naturally aspirated or non-electric engine is easier to make. Hybrids, I think, actually in some ways are the hardest. I think full electric, thinking from road cars, hybrids are the ones that catch on fire the most. I'll put it to you that way. So I'd assume that hybrids are the hardest.
Cheaper as well, aren't they, to make combustion engines than
V10s.
just a hybrid engine? Sure.
Oh, I can't imagine it isn't.
Yeah, and you also have the advantage, and the advantage of all of these, whether they're naturally aspirated, turbocharged, or supercharged, the advantage of all of them.
The most important factor is the sound. They sound so much better than any hybrid engine. Come on.
No, that's not the factor for me. That's not the factor for me. Noise is waste. Noise is waste. I've got my engineering background.
No, I want the screaming. I experienced for the first time in my life a V10 engine in person at the Goodwood Festival of Speed, because I never got the opportunity to see these cars when I was younger at a racetrack. And oh my goodness, Bring it back. I want to leave an F1 circuit deaf. It's worth it. Totally worth it.
Then just go to a NASCAR race, because
Oh,
I
yeah,
can
yeah.
tell you
Not the same. No.
that is like getting hit by a wall.
I forgot my earbuds on a practice session, and because you never get any let up, a Formula One car just goes and it's gone. The NASCAR was all around you, and the wall of the 30 these thundering cup cars coming past you was. After when we went past, me and Matt looked at each other like, "Yep, that's a life moment." There we go. It really was. But yeah. So yeah, I want to leave deaf because it's worth it. That's really funny. But also brace yourself, because a modern V10 might not sound the same, because it might be more efficient. They're not going to try and recreate the screaming V10 sound. Oh, that's what Hayden in the chat's just said. You can add in artificial sounds. No.
Oh no. That's an advocate for full electric engines and adding in artificial.
Do you remember they were going to add horns? They were going to add a horn to the back of the hybrid. Yeah,
Mercedes designed one and ran it.
Oh, go on then, Matt. I've got some ranty points here in a minute.
Right. Well, okay. So we've talked about the obvious reasons are it's a lot easier. You can get private. You could go back and have Cosworth build engines. It'll obviously be fantastic for GM. Have a much easier time joining. But you've also got some significant problems with this, just skipping these regulations altogether. Biggest problem is everyone's already spent $500 million building these engines that are supposed to be used in 2026. If you scrap them, then you've wasted $500 million. And, that's kind of contrary to the whole cost cap ethos of this modern era.
But you can't fall for a sunk cost fallacy. So let's keep going with a bad decision that's going to cost us in the long run because we've spent some money.
Well, I mean, we've spent $500 million and they're pretty much done at this point. It's a capped, the amount of spending from this point on is capped. So, it would have been better to make this choice a long time ago.
What I mean is, if you've then making a decision that's bad for the manufacturers, that's bad for the sport, that drives down viewership. Remember last time, that last hybrid engine regulation, it was a disaster for F1.
Well, and this is the fear, but on the other hand, everybody's had the same rules in the same time. And if you did a worse job, well, then isn't that the way sport's supposed to work? But you've got a bigger problem here, which is, what is Audi going to do? Because they don't have this generation engine to use. They have a 2026 engine to use.
Well, this will be the same as well for Ford, won't it? Ford have been starting their new partnership with Red Bull, and I know obviously they'll have the influence of Red Bull and their powertrain system, but there's also that relationship as well. But what I just want to kind of just trip down memory lane, these regs, weren't the engine regs driven by Porsche? Because they were supposed to be going in with a partnership with Red Bull. They pushed for these regs, which not a lot of people wanted, and then they backed out of that deal, and now they're with Ford, and we're now in this predicament. So am I right there? If my memory serves me correctly, that's what happens?
Yeah, this next generation engine with the hybrid, and this is where I love, because I can detail exactly how ridiculous it is. The next generation hybrid was meant to attract a non-current power unit manufacturer to the sport, mainly the Volkswagen Group. Originally Porsche, became Audi. But because Audi has so much experience, originally they were supposed to do front axle recovery. Now, if you add front axle recovery to the current engine, the 2026 engine, all of the problems everybody's talking about goes away, because you can recover enough energy even on circuits like Monza to increase the amount of recovery that's being asked for in these regulations. But because Audi had so much experience, all the other teams were afraid that would give them an unfair advantage, so they took that away, and that left them with an engine that couldn't recover enough energy. So then they went and started changing the aerodynamic regulations so that you wouldn't hear the engines going full speed down the straight, 20 kilometers slow, recharging the batteries to get a full battery. And all we're talking about is a result of these terrible design choices driven entirely by selfishness on the part of the teams and the manufacturers. It's just lovely stuff.
You know what I can see happening? This is so typical of F1. We're going to have a return of V10s, but then over the next couple of years with 2026, with this whole thought process and thinking that the rules are going to be so bad, watch us experience the best racing and closest racing in the next couple of years in F1 history, and then it's, oh, we're heading to V10s. So it's like, no, we don't want these regulations to go away. They were predicted to be so bad, but they're going to be absolutely amazing. And then we got V10s on the way, and it flips on its head again. Oh, I can just see it happening now. It's just a mess, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, in the best of all worlds, you would honestly, you would keep the engines we have. You would change the aerodynamic regulations, and then a year or two on, you would go to whatever updated engine that everybody agreed on. And as much as people are talking about V10s, the reality is, given the types of engines being built now, you probably would be looking at a V6 or a V or an I4 with some kind of minor KERS assist. Like, I've always believed that, like, supercapacitors, so you regen on braking and then you use that exiting, that would be the way to go. Or you have a small battery that gives you push to pass and you use that instead of DRS. That would also be a fine way to go. But the fundamental problem is they said, we want bigger batteries and more energy recovery, but we're going to take away one of your energy recovery systems, and we're not going to give you both axles to recover from. And from a physics point of view, that's just an equation that's very, very difficult to balance.
I've switched teams. So I know it's unlike me. I know I'm always wildly consistent. Sometimes between different shows on a Sunday, I've changed my mind by the time I go, well, I've just got to stick with what I think now. But now I'm happily going to go with, okay, if they're all on board, it sounds like V10s are going to be the best solution, because I think the rumbling is that everyone's unhappy with their 2026 engines except Mercedes.
I'm just going to put a last caveat in here, and it's the cynicism in me.
Go on.
Has anyone forgotten that it's a presidential re-election year in the FIA? I mean, what a better way to gain votes than get the backing of teams who potentially have influence over motorsport bodies? Then, yeah, bring back V10s. I'm just saying, that's the cynical side of me. MBS, we said it's about point scoring at the start. I think, yeah, it's purely this. Will it truly have the legs that we've got right now? Who knows? But yeah, I think it's just not a coincidence.
Fine. Okay. But in any case, if the teams haven't been happy with their 2026 engines and they're looking like it's going to be a 2014 scenario, I don't think anybody, even Mercedes, would want to look at that and go, let's go through that again. It's really bad for F1. And if it's bad for F1, it's bad for the franchises as well. So if these reports are true and there's some serious thinking about, all right, well, let's hang on to these regulations for a while, detangle ourselves from hybrid technology and go to V10s, this is a better option for racing. So I know Scott's talking about the closest racing. What we're really saying there is closest lap times. So closest potential lap times, closest potential race pace. Things can change and have a different winner. So in that way, it's close, and the championship might be close and exciting. But is the racing actually good? Like, how good is it compared to other wheel-to-wheel racing? So when you look at an overtaking F2, F3, is F1's overtaking and racing better than that? Or do we tend to kind of see these one-phase overtakes, and it either happens or it's over? And you don't get that kind of multi-corner side-by-side racing. And I think a lot of it is down to do with the cars. You do see drivers not wanting to push. They said they don't push for like 90% of the race. And then you have cars that are so heavy that once they go, they just go. And you can't save them. Wasn't it? It was Mike Caulfield was saying one of the Haas drivers told him, 3 seconds before it's going to go that it's going to go. And or something like 0.3 of a second. And you can't do anything about it. These are big, heavy, lumbering machines. Nobody wants that except for the hybrid. If we didn't have the hybrid element, they wouldn't be thinking, how can we add weight to these cars to make them heavy, right? So the weight element, the heaviness of those cars, the lack of nimbleness, go back and watch 2005, 2006. Watch how the cars go racing then, and you'll think, oh my God, is that what they robbed us of? Is that what hybrids took from us? Yeah, watch 2000s racing, and then you see how these cars look so different wheel to wheel. I'm not saying it's not exciting, but the actual racing element isn't as good because the cars are way too heavy because of the hybrids. So taking the hybrids away from me opens up bringing us back to the kind of much more nimble cars and nimble racing that we had a while back. And I don't think there's as much of an appetite for hybrids from the manufacturers as there might have been 4 or 5 years ago, because they know the future's going towards EV, right? Oh, but there's not enough charging stations. They're building them. They're building them everywhere. I was just speaking to somebody yesterday. They're building the charging stations. Don't worry about it. There's whole companies doing it. There's whole companies that have fleets of electric vehicles that are just going to have their own charging stations set up. It's fine, right? We're not going to mass transit hydrogen. It's not happening. We're moving towards EV. Hybrids was a solution that is going to fade relatively quickly. So for the manufacturers, they don't have the option to go to EV for racing because it's just not there yet. Formula E shows you where electric racing is. They're doing great stuff. They're being innovators, pushing stuff forward. They've even got a bit of fast charging, which gives you a bit more energy. But because they stubbornly refuse, as I've suggested, to go to battery swaps, then they're decades away. Not just because of the battery swaps things, just battery tech. It's decades away from recreating a Formula One race. You can't go petrol because of the optics of it. Sustainable fuels is perfect. You're not going to have mass transit, road relevant, sustainable fuels. That's not going to happen. But you can kind of hint that it is, and you can have your V10 naturally aspirated, fast, nimble F1 car with sustainable fuels and say, well, the car itself is sustainable. So the fuel we're using in the car itself isn't adding any carbon footprint. Everybody walks away feeling great, and it's win-win. That's my take on it. That's why I think the V10 might be an option. And also in the article from Automotor und Sport, they said if the manufacturers start withdrawing, start leaving Formula One, it's happened before, then they have a cheaper engine that someone can pick up and run with.
So I immediately want to point out that a sole thing to consider is that if you are ditching the electrics entirely, the hybrid element entirely, is that you are therefore going to have much higher fuel loads in the car. So there is a weight savings, but it's not just the full, we can ditch all the battery side stuff and save all that weight. And not all of the weight gain of the cars was driven solely by the electrics, although you would be able to have a significant savings, mostly because of the battery and the battery pack. And unrelated to that, I'm not sure if you saw this on the roadside, Chinese manufacturer BYD has announced they can get you 250 miles of charge in 5 minutes. They've got a new 1,000-watt charger, which for Formula E, I think you're talking about road stuff. That's exciting on the EV front. And I just thought I would toss it in there as an aside.
I think ultimately, what do people get excited about? And while obviously EVs are popular on the road, I've even got one myself, and it's great. It feels like I'm driving a big, massive go-kart, and the acceleration's amazing. But it doesn't get me excited. What gets me excited is hearing a V12 Lamborghini drive past me or a Ferrari. Like, that's still what gets people excited, and that's the case for F1 as well. The excitement, as great as Formula E has grown, there's less excitement over it because of the lack of sound, because of the lack of speed, and that's...
I don't think there's ever... I don't want to be contrarian, but I don't think there's ever been more excitement over Formula One. This is the most excitement there's ever been over Formula One.
No, definitely, and that's great because of Liberty Media and what they've done with the marketing and so forth. But it can still be better, can't it? And a lot of people have never even experienced those V10s or the sound of V8s even. So yeah, I'm fully on board with it. I do just think it's point scoring, but look, there's clearly legs and discussions behind the scenes of it, which is just really interesting. And we'll see moving forward.
Yeah. So it's just to bring this back to reality here, it occurs to me that most of the people watching Formula One have either only watched it in this regulation set, or they saw the switch from the last regulations to this regulation set. And this is just based on how much the sport has grown over the past 5 years. And so they have never seen a 2014, as you pointed out earlier. So for all we can poke holes in arguments one way or another, I think for Formula One, it is extremely important that whatever they do, they wind up with a mostly competitive set of cars racing on track. It would be no good. And we saw this with the Red Bull at the beginning of the regulation set. Remember, Max was dominating everything, and our numbers would go down. Everyone's numbers goes down. That kind of domination isn't good for the sport, and it's going to be really important for Formula One working with the FIA to get this right. And that concerns me because they don't always have a great track record.
All right. Well, that's a story that will rumble on, but I'm just surprised by the sureness of no, this is the thing. This is the thing they're talking about. It's a thing that might happen. I think overall, I'm just so fed up of the hybrids and the size of it. And even with the 2026 regs, it was a little smaller, but there's still an impact from the hybrids. And I don't care. I don't care if it's similar to what's being driven on the road or not. Horse racing isn't similar to what's on the road, is it? The Red Bull aerial wings thing where they fly in and out of the poles, that's not commercial plane relevant either. My private jet's completely different to those things. I can't relate. So it's a case of keeping the manufacturers happy, and I do suspect that being able to say, oh no, it's sustainable. We use this fuel that takes 85 acres of land to go do one lap, but it's sustainable. So we're good too. I think that solution might keep everybody happy. And then when they eventually get bored and go away and do something else, we'll have privateer F1 again. Yeah, why not? All right, here we go. So we've got what you reckons. We've got some reckons from you guys. Thanks for submitting those in our Patreon live chat. I don't like questions to the panel because we're all mugs. We don't know anything. But I'd love to know what you reckon. Chris G says, I reckon McLaren has had their rear wings clipped a little and Williams even more. Williams lucked into Mini DRS by not having the money for all that carbon fiber to strengthen the rear wings sufficiently. That's mean. But Matt, you were talking about the collateral damage. That it would be such a shame. Imagine if Williams is one of the casualties of that and just break everyone's hearts.
Yeah, and again, based on prior history, that's definitely a non-zero possibility, and it would be disastrous for Formula One if they manage to do something like that. Although we'll see. I'm hoping that the shipping delays will give them a little bit of cover to just put it off and give the teams a little bit more time to be sure they can comply with the regs.
We've got Brett. Hello, Brett, who says, I reckon we'll hear a lot of people telling us that this track is also not representative, so not to read too much into whatever the results are. All right, guilty as charged. I might have had some seasons where I said that 9 races in a row and then gone, hang on a minute. One of them's got to be representative. This track will tell us what cars are like on high wear, perhaps, if the surface of the track isn't too dissimilar to previous races. So no, we will get a good indication of which drivers can manage tyres a little bit as well. So maybe if it looks like high wear on the Friday, we can put some of our Norris versus Piastri theories to the test. So that might be one thing that gets shuffled out.
It could even do, I say, not the complete opposite. It could be the complete opposite in regards to the tyre wear. And it gives us more of a true reflection of the performance of the cars because the tyre wear is not actually an element that
I see what you mean.
Focus on.
Yeah.
So we're looking at the actual pure pace of the cars that have been designed, and it's just who's got the quickest car and who's quickest in those cars. So that could benefit Red Bull, and we see, you know what? Without the tyre wear issue, Red Bull is the quickest car, or Ferrari have made a miraculous recovery. I'm still hoping, but yeah, potentially that scenario happens as well.
It's a much more representative circuit than Australia. I think last season we had 5 street tracks in a row, and you keep on going, just don't get too excited, but it's a real track. They'll be able to run at the proper ride heights on it. It's not super bumpy. It's just been resurfaced. So actually you'll probably be getting some of the best in terms of aerodynamics out of this car because the track surface will have been graded to be minimally bumpy. It's a requirement when you resurface that you hit a certain standard. But once you're there, there is no standards other than eventually the drivers complain about it because their backs hurt. So I think we'll get a better picture. And if it is low wear, like Scott says, it might actually help Ferrari and Mercedes and Red Bull run much closer to McLaren. So it could be pretty intriguing. Because I don't think McLaren was the fastest in a straight line in Australia. And we have a very, very long straight into an incredibly difficult braking zone for them to play tricks with. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
Maybe it's too representative. That's so... It's full circle. That's too representative in some ways. It's very representative of your pace around China. So, yeah, definitely more so. It's a quote-unquote real circuit. If I could choose where to go racing any given weekend, I'd rather watch a race in China for the Chinese Grand Prix than the Australian Grand Prix. Sorry. Yeah, I think it's one of the good ones. It's one of the Tilkedromes. I think it's well designed to be challenging as well. I think you need a really strong aero platform because especially we were talking about that decreasing radius corner leading into the straight. You're starting from a very low speed and you're having to build up that aero as you increase your speed. So the cars that have the aero through a range of different speeds will be able to get the power on quicker in that corner. Although that was years ago. Maybe they can all just go flat from the beginning of that corner to the straight. I remember they did have to struggle at easing on the power in the olden days. But I don't know if now they can just be flat, if they've all just got good enough aero to be flat.
I think they can easily go flat.
Oh, can they? Oh.
It's not really that far off topic, but I saw a clip of Liam Lawson and Max Verstappen rating their favourite circuits, and they mentioned Silverstone. And interestingly enough, Max went, "No, it's too easy of a circuit. It's too easy in an F1 car." He goes, "The corners don't feel like corners. It's flat out for 80% of the time. It's much better in a GT car," which I found was really interesting because I absolutely love Silverstone, but obviously he's got a lot more experience than I have, and that's kind of how good these F1 cars have got now. They've made a lot of these corners. It's like Eau Rouge as well. Eau Rouge, they make a big thing about Eau Rouge. It's so treacherous going up there. No, it isn't.
Well, when things go wrong,
it's like a straight.
If things go wrong, they go wrong bigly. That's the thing with Eau Rouge, isn't it?
Yeah, but mainly when it's in wet conditions. Other than that, in dry, the drivers literally aren't even thinking about it. So, but China, Shanghai is such a great circuit for racing. There's so many places that the drivers can line up and overtake, especially the first corner as well. It's brilliant.
Well, I was just going to bring that up. Hayden in the chat mentioned that first turn
it's the
complex.
Best. Yeah, it's the best.
And I do love it. Remember, that's where Kvyat just punted Vettel when he was in the Red Bull. We've seen so many crazy things happen.
Hang on. We've got an argument here.
No. Right. I just have to stick up for Kvyat here because that was Vettel getting his pants in a twist because he decided to leave the biggest gap on the inside. And because he was in a Ferrari and he's this big I am, how dare Danny Kvyat, a driver with less experience than him, make use of that gap? I'll tell you what, if that was Max Verstappen today or another popular driver today, would be going, "Oh, what a brilliant overtake that was." But it was because Vettel got caught napping.
Was that the ping pong? What are we doing here?
No, he called him a torpedo.
Called him a missile torpedo.
Yeah, he goes, "Oh, you're coming in like a torpedo." And Kvyat went, "You left the gap."
I think it was Sochi then where they said, "Are we driving or are we playing ping pong?"
That was Kvyat's fault, in fairness. But yeah, I think that was like the next race after China or something. Yeah. It wasn't good timing for him.
Oh, and then he got sacked, and hence Max Verstappen. Was that 2016 then? That must have been 2016.
I can't think it was. I can't remember that year. But
so Max's debut for Red Bull was Barcelona 2016.
Which he won. Which was the race for Rosberg and Hamilton collided on the first lap,
where Rosberg smashed Hamilton off track, and then Hamilton said, "If I'm going down," which he was, "I'm taking you with me." You'll hear the engine note. The engine note did not let up on Hamilton's car all the way into the side of Rosberg's car as well. Wow, what a diversion that was! Why do we? Oh, that first corner. No, that first corner is really good, and it's also the multi-21 corner as well, wasn't it?
Was it? Was it Shanghai or was that
Or
Malaysia?
was it Malaysia?
21.
Oh, right, chat. Tell us where Multi 21 was. I really thought that was. I thought that was China.
Well, you're in the right ballpark. There's definitely an Asian circuit.
At least
I thought that was Malaysia. I could be wrong.
Oh gosh.
At least I'm on the right continent. Okay, we have quite a few good reckons as well.
Some of you are young enough you should be remembering this.
And
it should not be on me.
There's a few ways to get in contact with the show. So you can email us. You can email us feedback@missedapex.net. You can also leave a comment in the YouTube. You can message us in our Patreon Discord. I'll turn the Spotify comments back on. I just turned them off because it was just, it's another thing. Just another thing where people can call me a turnip. But that's fine. I'll turn them back on because there is no public place for people to comment on the audio, so I'll do that. But also, if you could leave us reviews, that really helps at this time of the season. So if you're on Spotify or Pocket Cast or Apple, if you could leave us a 5-star review as well, that would be absolutely fantastic. So it was the Malaysian Grand Prix in 2013, was Multi 21. As Scott says, at least I was on the right continent. Okay, so Mike Stoner reckons, says, I reckon Hadjar will crash on the formation lap. Boo, boo, boo.
No.
And Slim Clem says, I'm going the other way. I reckon Hadjar will have a redemptive weekend. So, not going to run away from this. A few people in our Patreon chat got upset with me because I have an opinion on that, because Helmut Marko made what I think was a pretty contemptible, very out of date, very mean and unnecessary comment in the press that it was embarrassing that he cried on TV. So it's definitely mean of Helmut Marko to say that. However, why they're yelling at me is I'm saying, like, if I ended up crying on TV, I'd be like, oh man, I wish I hadn't cried on TV. So it is a little bit embarrassing to have cried on TV, and everyone's saying, no, it's definitely not embarrassing, and everyone should be free to cry. And there may be some merit in that. But in the reality that we live in now, I don't think it's mad to say, you know, if you're on telly and you cry, you go, if I could go back in time and choose whether to cry or not, you'd probably snap your fingers and say, well, I'm going to make it so I didn't do that. So I just think Hadjar might look at that and go, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. Like, when it's the same as if you lose it, if you lose your temper. Losing your temper is a natural sporting reaction as well. But you might look at that and go, oh, I wish I'd not done that. I wish I'd not kicked off like that. No one else brave enough to weigh in? Anyone else brave enough to weigh in?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was a natural reaction to have because he cares so much about the moment, and he has made a fool of himself. Like, I would be doing the same. I've crashed out plenty of times in the first.
I know, we've all seen your streams and karting.
I know. And every single time I'm like, I've made such a fool of myself. And if I cried on stream after that, I'd be looking it back, going, oh, what an absolute, like,
if I could turn it back,
moment that was. Like,
yeah. But if I said, did you see Scott? Oh, he's an idiot. He cried. Then I'm then wrong. Then obviously I'm wrong for doing that.
Sorry, not for Horner, but for Marko to
do
say
that, exactly.
Come out and say, it's like, dude, just you don't need to say that to the press. Like, the guy's already got it hard enough anyway. You can say that to him behind closed doors or whatever. But no doubt he'll be looking at back going, oh, that was.
Well, that's me and Scott cancelled. Do you want to get cancelled as well, Matt?
Well, I actually very much like your analogy to losing your temper.
Yeah,
and anyone who's ever been in a high stakes sporting event knows that it can happen to even the most, chill person. You suddenly see them screaming at somebody else. Just a combination of the adrenaline and
Christian Bale on set.
Oh, all of that stuff.
Christian Bale on set. And good for you. That video.
Yeah. And so we're all susceptible to those kinds of emotions. And I think it's fair to say, you look back and say, oh yeah, it would have been better, all things considered, if I'd avoided that. But I also don't think that it's right to give him any particular stick for it, even if I would have felt a certain way. Well, I mean, when did I grow up? How old am I? All this sort of stuff comes into play. And we can all be agreed that Marko was an absolute turnip.
Thank you.
For doing that.
No argument on that. Absolutely. Also, though, it's low-hanging fruit, isn't it? You got a crash helmet on. Just keep crash helmet on till you're sorted. It's like a cheat code. And someone pointing out Paul Gascoigne cried, and we all loved him for it. That was Italia 90, and that was England getting knocked out in the semi-finals. and Paul Gasly got a second yellow card, so he would have missed the final if England had got to it. But they never made it anyway. Gary Lineker sort of mocked him on the pitch for doing it. And he's like the wokest British pundit going. All right, cool. Let's see. Where are we going to go? Clem says you're going to go the other way and have Hadjar will have a redemptive weekend. Look, from the little we saw, all looked fine, didn't it? All looked fine. Definitely sort of starting to make me a fan. And you go, yeah, a little bit behind Tsunoda, who had a bit of a blinder. But yeah, I think there's potential for him to have a good weekend.
That all depends on whether RB decide to pit him from outside the points again, like they do with Yuki Tsunoda.
Yeah.
Depends on that strategy call, doesn't it, really? Because he could drive his absolute best and, end up finishing down in 13th.
So I don't really care about the result. When we're talking about which driver is better than another driver, if Piastri had kept it on track and Norris had been the one to have an off, I might still have looked at the lap charts and go, all right, but looking forward, you go, Norris looked in control up until that point. So, he might be the fastest. The result doesn't always give you the information that you need. Like, we all know Tsunoda had an absolutely blinding weekend. Like, we know that. There's a possibility if it had rained just a tiny bit less. Yeah, just for like half a lap. There was like a half a lap window where Verstappen blinks and Ferrari's incorrect decision suddenly becomes correct.
Yeah, I mean, Lewis wins the race and Tsunoda is on the podium.
I don't think it actually worked out there because I think Max was actually possibly half a lap too late. Like, he couldn't have done it a lap earlier, but the optimum was in the middle of the lap. But if Hamilton had won that race, that wouldn't have been an indication that they were in good shape. They'd still be in awful shape, So sometimes the out-and-out result isn't always fully useful. All right. Harb says, I reckon Ant-Man will be within a tenth of Russell. Is that what I'll go for a bit of calling him Ant-Man. Ant-Man will be within a tenth of Russell. That is fully possible. So he made a mistake in Australia, didn't he, in Q1, which I slept through my alarms for. And so he had floor damage for the rest of that quali lap. But in the race, it looks really good. I love the way he's driving it is noticeably different. And it's either because he's got something special or because he's doing something fundamentally wrong.
It's a sim racer.
What? Explain.
He's a sim racer. He's an iRacer, Kimi Antonelli. So he's using the sim racing lines. Have you not noticed this? He's using all of the curb, all of the track that is possible to him, too much so. I think he's realising he's not in his sim rig, and that's why he's trying to find as much out of the track as he possibly can, and too much so in Australia. We saw him in practice doing the same thing. And it's like, okay, you need to just dial it back a little bit with those kind of track limits and not take these ground effect era cars over these curbs, which you can cause damage. And it's not like sim racing where there's grip on every single curb. It's not like that in real life. But that's how I see he's driving these F1 cars. And you listen to Sky Sports and they're very much like, oh my God, look at him. He's so aggressive. And I think but that's what's exciting about him is that no one else is doing that. Not even Max does that. And you look how an avid sim racer he is. There's a certain something. I wish there was a French term for when you just didn't quite know what it was, but there's something there that you can't put your finger on. Normally the French have a word for that kind of thing, but there's a fan tingle where you go, oh, hang on a minute. There might be something exciting there. And, it would be... it's time, isn't it? It's time for a new superstar to enter our hearts.
Yeah, he's a good pick, honestly. The thing that I noticed, and I would say to Scott, as much as it might be iRacing, it's probably also F2 because I don't think they're using the ground effect, so they can probably run softer suspension they are now.
Yeah, last year.
But what I would say is that when he got clear, because he started far in the back, when he got into clean air, he was easily running exactly the same times as Russell. It just mid-pack.
Can I?
And that's going to be something to watch if he has a good qualifying and is up at the front with him.
Can I don't want to be a bit of a downer on his performance, but can I just say, as great as it was, because it was those conditions and it was his first race, can we not, we did this with Perez, can we not hype up drivers' performances for going out in Q1 and
Recovery drive.
Finishing in the top 10 and overtaking cars that they should easily be overtaking. I will, because it was obviously, it was still like a top performance for him because it was the conditions and it was his first race. But if he consistently goes out in Q1 and then has these recovery drives, he can't keep lauding that, because ultimately he needs to be fighting with his teammate, with the Red Bulls, with the McLarens.
Shut up, Ant-Man driver of the day.
I want to see Kimmy, and that's where I'm excited to see him. I'm not excited to see him overtake a Stake F1 or a Williams, with due respect.
Yeah, I think his race pace is equal to that. And the only other thing I'll say is his first F2 win came in the rain at Silverstone, and I happened to see it. So he might also be a bit of a rainmeister. He
had a similar race in changeable conditions. Not interchangeable, Spanners, changeable conditions. I'm surprised Brad didn't pick you up on that on the.
You can't. You have to see, if you say things like that, I have to say the reference, otherwise people are lost. But apparently, I say, Jenson Button used to gamble in interchangeable conditions. Me and Brad then had a 90-minute group chat WhatsApp full-on argument about whether interchangeable was valid or not. I had fully lawyered him. I backed him into a corner that interchangeable was valid. And then his actual lawyer fiance came home, saw the argument and weighed it in, and obviously won, because she does that for a living. So that's not fair. So now I say interchangeable conditions. Sorry.
But he won that race. He won his second F2 race in
changeable conditions. All right. Okay.
In changeable conditions. Yeah, he definitely seems to be one who relishes when it's a wet race.
And that reminds me of the debutants. He was the only one that actually finished the race, because even Lawson went down, didn't he?
What about Behrman?
Behrman
did Behrman
finish? It just took him. He was just finished. Yeah, he just finished. It took quite long for him to cross the line after.
Finished after everyone had gone home. That's why you forgot about it.
He did finish last.
I did say debutante, meaning first race, though.
Oh my God! No, are you one of those? Are you team? Technically, they're not a rookie. You're not one of those.
No, I'm not. Okay. I used a specific term, debutante, meaning like your initial presentation to society, to differentiate people who were in their first race from people who were rookies.
If you do a list, I did it last week or on Sunday. God, it's been a long week already. There was, I think, 12 drivers had an off. So Antonelli had a spin though, didn't he? He was one of the ones. He did have a little spin.
He did the same thing George did at the same corner. He in quali, I think it was, or practice, where he just dipped a wheel and spun it, but safety cars and that helped bring him back up to the back of the pack.
So we have a reckon from Tim that says, I reckon we're about to see a rookie resurgence in China. We will go from 4 out of 6 crashing. You have to say full season rookie during the race in Australia to only 1 out of 6 crashing during the race in China. Sorry, Lawson, but you bad. That's Tim, not me. Tim said that. The only one crashing on the weekend outside that group will be Lance Stroll. Do you know what? When's the last time Lance Stroll lost it on his own? He just went off. I don't think he's... Oh, what? Brazil.
Not that long ago, mate.
Oh, great. Do you know when you have an argument, she's immediately killed? And then and also it's the worst example of a crash because of the rejoin as well.
Yes, I'll rejoin through the gravel.
Do you know what? I'm just gonna kill that point. I'm just gonna kill it. I'm not gonna keep pushing that.
There it goes in the edit. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a similar one. So Brett says, I reckon we'll see Hulk as the second driver. Yeah, maybe, because Bortoletto was looking okay until his off. I don't think Hulkenberg will care at all. He'll enjoy his F1 race, go home to his beautiful family, and cash the check.
Bortoletto actually did very well. He had a 5 seconds penalty as well for an unsafe release. It wasn't his fault. He had a decent weekend. And unfortunately, the crash, I think that was he on slicks at the time as well? I think it was it was just before Lawson crashed. So I think he spun on the curb and obviously the right rear.
It was before.
While he was spinning. It was before. So he was on slicks so it's a bit of a shame that it ended that way because he deserved to finish the race because he was having a good weekend.
Yes, chat. I said it instantly. There's no delay. There's no need to keep typing Brazil. Clem says the quote, Lance, can you stay out? Yes, and then crash. That was Sochi though, wasn't it? So that was a few years ago now.
And also last year, China in the very same race that Lance Stroll drove into the back of Daniel Ricciardo. under safety car conditions. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, but that doesn't count because that's going out with someone. That's what I think his biggest flaw. I don't think of him as particularly crashy now, but he does crash with like other cars. So his spatial awareness seems to be not where the others is. So you tend to turn in on someone or hit the back of someone. That was my thinking, and then you've all pointed out examples that prove me wrong. So rookie resurgence, Bortoletto beating Hulkenberg, and then Adam says, I reckon that Leclerc will out-qualify Hamilton. And sadly for me, as a Hamilton fan, I think that's nailed on. I'm still a bit down. I'm a bit down about the weekend as a Hamilton fan. And it is that gap to Leclerc. No, new car, new engine, blah, blah, blah. But he's supposed to be Lewis Hamilton. And right now, the evidence is, until I see something that changed my mind, Leclerc's faster than Hamilton right now.
Don't disagree with that at all. But speaking of relevant tracks, because of I still don't judge many drivers too harshly in relation to what happened at Albert Park, especially in those conditions. Yeah. I will judge more of these drivers over the next few races where we go to China, Suzuka, Bahrain, Saudi. I'll be judging them a lot more over the next 4 races than the carnage and chaos that we saw at Albert Park last week. We've got some good races coming up. So China, I like. What's after that is Suzuka.
Japan,
yeah. Then and Suzuka's a great track. It's a little bit Imola-ish, but not as bad. Like, it is going to be hard to overtake. It is a proper old school F1 track, but I do love it. There's lots of other things that make up for it, like great elevation, that section 1, going under the bridge. You get good racing into that hairpin, and 130R is pretty spectacular. There's a lot of good things, but yeah, it is a manage your expectations on wheel to wheel. And then we go to Bahrain, which Saudi, is great because they were moved further back. Oh, Bahrain, that's great. Saudi, where you have to watch it through a gap in your fingers every single time. Scariest track on the calendar by far. And then I think it's Miami. Is it Miami after that? And then Monaco. And I'll be able to tell you at the end of the week exactly what our plans are for Miami. But if you're going to be in and around the Miami Grand Prix, it's pretty likely that we're going to be doing a live show there. I've just spoken to the same club. I've been speaking to Box Auto, so it looks like we do have the same venue. If we're going ahead, it was a great time. There's games, there's reckoning stuff, and there's going to be the sprint race review as well. So I'm really hoping that'll go ahead. This has been a nice little roundup and review, nice relaxed midweek show. We've got to let Scott get back to work, but go and follow him on his YouTube channel, which is Stuffeyy, I think spelt with 18 Ys. No, it's STUFFEEEY. No. STUFFEEY. It'll be link in the description, in the notes below. Go check me out there. I'll be doing my watch-alongs for every single session. Wait. Sprint race? Sprint race included. Ooh. Yeah, I'm up early doing FP1. Also, how did you get away with that with a baby in the house? She's sleeping in our bedroom. I've moved her out. Right. So I have just actually had to buy myself a laptop to do editing and so forth outside of this room because, it's baby's room now. Oh, mate, I am so sorry to hear that. I was scared that you were going to say moved out into the garage at one point, so... Yeah, into the bed. I don't have one. I mean, for the Australian Grand Prix, I did fully just camp out on the sofa because it just wasn't worth waking everybody up for it. So I'm sure there's other people doing that too. Matt Trumpets, what are you pushing on us these days?
April 20th, City Winery. If you want to come see me play some music in New York City, DMC of Run DMC will be our guest artist. And buy my wife's books, as always, so I can buy a Ferrari and retire early. And the MotoGP pod. You've also Let's get 4 figures. Let's get 4 figures.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't going to talk about exact download figures, but the MotoGP podcast, go and check that out if you're a MotoGP fan. I'm not on it. I know, sorry about that. But yeah, Matt, Kyle, Jules, Danny, and Adam, they've done a really good job, and it's been building. When people listen to it, they want to keep listening to it. And the last podcast they got was like 850 downloads, which that is really mega for a non-F1 motorsport podcast. It's really good. And we won't talk about the Formula E figures. But we will see you here on Sunday at 10:30 a.m. UK time with Chris Stevens and Christian Pedersen. follow me by searching for Richard Reddy or Spanners Reddy, whatever social media platform you're on. Missed Apex F1 on Twitter, where I'm doing a few more just hot takes as they occur to me there. And it seems to be a popular place to argue with me. So you can just, if you like arguing with me, that's probably the best place to do it at the moment. But until we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. Wait, your sim rig is in the nursery, Scott. Oh no. I thought that's what you were saying, but I said no, he doesn't mean his sim rig is in the nursery. Crazy times.